Welcome to the weekend edition of the Fast Five by Fear and Greed. I'm Michael Thompson, and hello, Sean Aylmer.
Hello, Michael.
Sean, on weekdays it's all about the Fast Five, the top 5 business stories in 5 minutes. On the weekend, we still try to keep it to 5 minutes, but we're going to pick out the biggest story of the week, the sleeper story, one that's kind of flying under the radar a bit, the most remarkable story, and then our favourite. So let's jump straight into it. What was the biggest story of the week for you?
I think interest rates and the Reserve Bank's feel low. There's light at the end of the interest rate tunnel. This week, the Reserve Bank board kept rates on hold. That's the first time in 11 meetings that they haven't lifted the cash rate. Now, the cash rate is the benchmark rate. The banks use that one to set mortgage rates, credit card rates, deposit rates, all sorts of things. It's gone up by 3.5 percentage points in a year, the fastest rate rising cycle in modern times. And now it looks like it's coming to an end. Reserve Bank Governor Philip Lowe said inflation data at the end of this month is all important as to whether rates rise again. There's definitely a bias towards lifting rates one more time, but Michael, who knows? What about you?
Well, look, the biggest story for me this week came from federal politics. It kind of came in 2 parts. The first was the by-election lost last weekend for the Liberal Party in the Melbourne seat of Aston. Significant because it's the first time in a century that the government had won a seat from the opposition at a by-election. But it prompted a lot of kind of soul-searching from the coalition over what they stand for in terms of climate change and the voice referendum. They called a party room meeting. And that's where the second part of the story all unfolded, because the Liberal Party actually voted to formally oppose the government's model for the referendum later this year over an Indigenous voice to Parliament. They want a legislated voice rather than a change to the Constitution. It is a huge and controversial move from the Liberals. It's one that's seen a huge backlash from Indigenous community leaders. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said that it was clear the opposition hadn't listened to the messages from the Aston by-election. He is still hopeful, optimistic perhaps, that the referendum could still succeed because of the goodwill of coalition voters. Some coalition MPs may not toe the party line on this one. There's a few already putting their hand up to say they won't. What this does mean, of course, that we're in for a very political, potentially very ugly 6 months, and we may have just seen the referendum fail before it could even get off the ground.
Fair enough, Michael.
All right. Most remarkable. What was it for you this week, Sean?
Well, the resilience of the Australian housing market. Consensus has been that house prices will fall this cycle by at least 10%, with many economists thinking it could be closer to 20%. So far across capital cities, house prices are down, peak to trough, about 9%. Mind you, Sydney's a bit more than that. This week, we found out that house prices across the country, on average, rose. Yes, rose last month for the first time since April last year. It looks like pressures other than interest rates are starting to play out in the market. Lower stock levels, tight rental conditions, overseas immigration. Now, Sydney house prices rose 1.4% last month. They've been higher 2 months in a row. Melbourne prices were higher, so too Perth and Brisbane. Unfortunately for those in Hobart, Canberra, Darwin and Adelaide, the story isn't quite as positive. But overall, house prices were up 0.2% last month across the capital cities. This ain't supposed to be happening. The impact of 10 rate rises and people coming off low fixed rate loans is supposed to be pushing prices down. Pretty remarkable.
Yeah, certainly is. The most remarkable story for me is one that everyone's been talking about, Sean. Donald Trump. This week, he became the first US president ever to face criminal charges, and what a spectacle it was. We've talked through the week about the allegations. Quite simply, Trump's personal lawyer or company allegedly made a series of hush money payments to various people, including porn star Stormy Daniels, to prevent claims that Trump feared would be harmful to his presidential campaign. The former president declared it to be a witch hunt. He was warned not to say anything by the judge during his court appearance, but that jurisdiction seemed to end at the New York state line. So Trump just unloaded when he got back to Florida. He gave it to everyone from Hillary Clinton to the judge's family. The next court date isn't until December 4. But the most remarkable part of all this, Sean, is that it may just feed quite perfectly into Trump's narrative of being essentially a victim of a stacked system, and could actually boost his chances of becoming the Republican candidate to take on Joe Biden next year. Just the theatre of it all.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
All right, let's move on to sleeper story of the week. What was it for you?
It's the growth of Chinese diplomacy. This week we found out that there's a strong chance Prime Minister Anthony Albanese will visit Beijing later this year to mark the 50th anniversary of the first ever PM to visit China. That was Gough Whitlam, of course. If Albo goes to Beijing, that would be a substantial warming of relations between the two countries. Also this week, China hosted French President Emmanuel Macron. The European Union President Ursula von der Leyen was there as well. She has also visited Russia recently. Of course, we had Victorian Premier Daniel Andrews in China last week. Not really sure why. Bit of a mystery on that one. There's also been lower level visits to China from Japan, Malaysia, New Zealand, Brazil in the last month. Beijing, behind the scenes, is working very hard to ingratiate itself into the world order with or without the US's blessing. And Australia is part of that. Massive sleeper story, Michael.
Yeah, big sleeper story. In one line, Sean, my favourite sleeper story this week, though, was the economics professor who said that we do not need to worry about AI and ChatGPT basically stealing everybody's jobs, that the labour market can adjust to it. And you know what? It may actually lead to us all working a 4-day week, which I actually quite like the sound of.
I like that.
All right, favourite story of the week, what was it?
It's actually 3 stories in one. 50 years ago, a bloke named Reg Rose started a mail order business with his wife Hazel. This week, after 50 years, he stepped down from the Super Retail Group. Now, that owns Supercheap Auto, Rebel Sports, Macpac, etc. Reg is worth about $1 billion. 50 years, good innings, he called it. Sure is. Another one this week. Story about a Lebanese immigrant, Fred Shahin, who back in 1984 couldn't find a job, needed a house. He did have some money, answered an ad in the Adelaide Advertiser and bought a BP petrol station, mostly because it had a house attached to it. That initial shop evolved into the 205-strong network of on-the-run retailers. Mr. Shahin died in the late 1990s, but now they've sold the business for $1.2 billion. And finally this week, Aesop, which is the skincare group, it's been sold for $3.7 billion, the largest luxury product sale ever. Originally started in a shed in Armidale in Melbourne back in 1987. Great yarns.
Yeah, they are all fantastic, and I completely agree with you. They're my favourite stories from the week as well. There we go, 5 minutes and pretty much everything you need to know from the world of business. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you very much, Michael.
We'll be back on Monday morning with the top 5 business stories in 5 minutes. Don't forget to hit follow, and don't forget as well that the Amazon Echo smart speaker range comes with Alexa built in. Simply say, Alexa, play the Fast 5 by Fear and Greed podcast to catch the latest episode, and you can grab yours now at amazon.com.au. I'm Michael Thompson, and this is the Fast 5 by Fear and Greed.